Hi, welcome back to another PC Playground video. In today's video, we are going to build the best 1440p, yes, and some 4K gaming on the latest Intel chip that can play just about any game for, yes, under $1,200. In this video, I am going to break it up into two parts. The first part, I'll go over the parts list and explain my thoughts on them while we build. In the second part, we'll do some gameplay and some in-game benchmarks to make sure that this system can actually perform. With that said, let's get to it. For the motherboard, I went with the ASRock B760M Pro RS LGA 1700 Intel socket DDR5 micro ATX motherboard. Oof, mouthful. It supports 13th and 12th gen Intel Core processors out of the box, has a 7+1+1 power phase, supports DDR5 up to 7200 MHz, has one PCI Gen 5.0 by 16 lane, one PCI Gen 3.0 by 16 lane, has one M.2 key E for Wi-Fi, has three Hyper M.2 PCIe Gen 4 drives. For the CPU, we went with the Core i5-13500 from Intel, one of their latest CPUs. It's a 13th gen Raptor Lake processor, has a base power of 65 watts, can turbo up to 154 watts. It is a locked CPU, so no overclocking. Has Intel UHD integrated graphics, comes with 23 megabytes of L3 cache, comes with 11.5 megabytes of L2 cache, has 14 cores, 6 P-cores and 8 efficiency cores, and 20 threads. The P-core frequency base is 2.5 and can boost to 4.8. The E-core base frequency is 1.8 and can boost to 3.5 gigahertz. Supports both DDR4 and DDR5. Comes with an included box cooler, and the date first available was November 9th, 2022. For the storage, we went with Silicon Power 2TB NVMe 4.0 Gen drive. It has read speeds up to 5,000 megabytes per second. It has write speeds up to 4,800 megabytes per second. While not the fastest drive, it still is relatively fast at 500 megabytes per second read speeds, and it will do just fine for what we're doing here today. For the RAM, we went with OLOY Blade 32 gigabytes, 2x16, DDR5, 600 megahertz. The timing is 32, 38, 38, 76. Cache latency is 32. It's a dual channel kit. This is a combo option with the motherboard I bought, and the date first available was March 7th, 2023. And then my research is from Newegg. They're telling us when it was first available. Now for the chassis or computer case. This is one of my favorites. Here we have the Thermalright Divider 170 TG ARGB motherboard sync micro ATX computer case. That's a mouthful. Comes with two pre-installed 120mm ARGB fans. Has a tempered glass side panel with ventilation. Has a front mesh panel as well for great airflow. Comes in black and white or just black. Very nice design. Also comes with two USB 3.0 ports, one USB 2.0 port, microphone jack, headphone jack, power button, reset button. Although the reset button is hooked up to the included fan and ARGB hub, so you can change your colors from the reset switch. For the CPU cooler, we went with a liquid cooler. We went with the Thermalright Frozen Note 240mm white ARGB water cooling CPU cooler. Comes in at a price around $52 and will more than keep our CPU cool and will look really nice in the case. For the GPU, we went with the AMD Radeon RX 6800 by Gigabyte OC Edition. The RX 6800 comes with 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory, has a 3-fan design for optimal cooling, has two display ports 1.4 out and two HDMI 2.1 out. It's boostable to 2,155 MHz, has 3,840 stream processors based on the RDNA2 architecture, has a 256-bit memory interface, and has the PCIe 4.0 interface as well. For the power supply, things get a little complicated. Originally, I was going with a Thermalright Tough Power 750 watt 80 plus gold power supply. But I had forgotten I used it on another build, so I ended up using what I had on hand. We ended up using an Aries Game AGB Series 750 watt 80 plus bronze semi-modular power supply. This power supply will work just fine for today's build, but would recommend an 80 plus gold power supply for efficiency because this system will pull some watts. Okay, with the build completed, let's make sure we have a post. Then we'll move on to the cost breakdown. The total cost of the build was $1,195. We do have some other options we could use to cut costs if you wanted to. We could have went with an i5 13400, 13400F, or you could go up a notch to 13600K. Really, any i5 13th gen CPU will perform really well for you. Okay, with that said, let's move on. Gameplay. Here we are in Apex Legends on the firing range. We are at 1440p dynamic high settings. After about 10 minutes of play, we're averaging around 213 FPS with 1% lows around 169. Just keep in mind that results may vary a little depending on where you are on the map. Moving on. Battlefield 2042. Here we are at 1440p, graphics preset set to high, refresh rate set to 140 Hertz, and on the map, we're averaging around 90 FPS. We had highs up to 100 FPS and saw some lows around 79 FPS. Again, results may vary depending on the map and where you are on it. In-game benchmarks are more reliable and easy for anyone to replicate. Next up, we have Star Wars Jedi Survivor. At 1440p, graphics quality set to high preset, here we're averaging around 90 FPS. We're hitting highs of 103 and seeing it dip down to 73 for the lows. Keep in mind, it will vary on the map and where you are on the map. Now let's move on to the in-game benchmarks. First up, we have Forza Horizon 5. At 1440p high, we had an average of 179 FPS. Ultra settings, we had an average of 128. And 1440p Extreme, an average of 110 FPS. Moving on to the 4K settings, we averaged 123 FPS on high, 89 FPS on Ultra, and in Extreme settings, we averaged 75 frames per second. Really nice showing. Next up, Cyberpunk 2077. At 1440p medium, we averaged 143 frames per second. On high, we averaged 110 frames per second. On Ultra, we averaged 84 frames per second. Moving on to 4K, medium settings, we averaged 100 frames per second. And at 4K high settings, we averaged 62 frames per second. In Ultra settings, we averaged 40 frames per second. So struggling here a little bit. Next, we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider. At 1440p medium settings, we achieved an average of 162 frames per second. At high settings, 157 frames, and in the highest settings possible, we had 133 frames per second. For 4K medium settings, we achieved 90 frames per second. High settings, we achieved 86 frames per second, and on the highest settings, we achieved 70 frames per second. Moving on to F1 2023. Here we're on Great Britain track at 1440p. At medium settings, we averaged 281 frames per second. On high, we achieved 211 frames, and ultra high, we averaged 56 frames per second. At 4K, medium settings, we averaged 157. High settings, we averaged 101. And when you go to ultra high, we averaged 26 frames. Took a big dip there. Now, Total War Warhammer. 1440p medium, we averaged 135. High, we averaged 93. And ultra, we averaged 79. At 4K medium settings, we average 62 frames per second. High, we average 44 frames per second. And ultra, we average 38 frames per second. Moving on to Far Cry 6. At 1440p, we achieved an average of 142 frames per second. On high settings, 128, and on ultra settings, 109 frames per second. Moving on to 4K, at medium settings, we achieved 81 frames per second. High settings, we achieved 75 frames per second. And on ultra settings, 63 frames per second. Okay, with the benchmarks out of the way, let's do the wrap-up. Okay, this is a build that really performed at 1440p with high FPS. It was built in a nice black and white build in the Thermalright divider case. If you're interested in making this build yourself, I'll leave links to all the parts in the description below. With that said, if you like what I'm doing, hit that thumbs up, and while you're at it, why not subscribe as well? And as always, thanks for watching, and have yourself a great day.